So in her 30 years, more than 30 years of very rich and varied experiences in the U.S. Foreign Service, Ambassador Bodine ascended to the top levels of the service. During her career, she focused primarily on the Arabian Peninsula and the Persian Gulf issues, including on strategic security, counterterrorism, governance, and reform issues. She served, as many of you know, as ambassador to Yemen from 1997 to 2001, and as deputy chief of mission in Kuwait during the Iraq invasion and occupation in 1990. She also served overseas in Hong Kong, Bangkok, and Baghdad. Ambassador Bodine held a variety of leadership positions as well in Washington, including as acting coordinator for counterterrorism in the bureaus of Near Eastern Affairs, African Affairs, and Political Military Affairs. Mm-hmm. Ambassador Bodine also served as dean of the School of Professional Studies at the Foreign Service Institute and holds a BA in Political Science from University of California at Santa Barbara and an MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you today. And I have several questions myself to start us off, and I know that our audience will have a lot of questions as well. So, Barbara, you've had such an extraordinary career. I wonder, thinking back, if you might share with us a bit of what initially attracted you to the career in diplomacy and what sort of steps and process led you to embark on this career.
I discovered the Foreign Service as a career the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I already loved reading the diplomatic, the foreign news in the Los Angeles Times, but I had absolutely no idea what you do with this. The west end of the San Fernando Valley, for anybody who's here or watching, is not the most engaged and sophisticated part of Los Angeles County. I was lucky enough to be selected for this summer school class on international relations. The professor, and I think of him as a professor, brought in people from all of the consulate generals in Los Angeles to talk to our class about the foreign policies of their countries. And anyone who knows LA City schools, they're these great big spread out campuses. And so somebody had to go to the flagpole, meet these people, bring them back to the classroom. And as one of the few girls in the room, I got the protocol duty. And I became fascinated with the fact that these people were doing international relations. And so when I took one back to the flagpole, and I think he was the Brit, I finally got up all the courage of a 15-year-old and said, what is it exactly that you do? And he started talking about diplomacy and foreign service. And, lights are going off and bells are whistling. And I remember asking him, that sounds really cool. Can I join? And he very nicely explained that I had my own diplomatic service. And I was probably better served joining that one rather than trying to join the FCO. And we had to do 2 papers in the class, and I did one paper on what is the U.S. Foreign Service. So I did my own career research and decided then and there that was it. I picked my undergraduate school and my major, which was Asian Studies, with an eye towards going into the Foreign Service. I fought like crazy to get into the junior year abroad program and spent a year in Hong Kong. And while I was in Hong Kong, I became essentially a groupie to the Consul General in Hong Kong. This was in the days when you could actually wander in and out of government buildings. And who are you people? And what is it that you do? And how do you do it? And just basically was doing, field research on what is the Foreign Service. Was told I needed to go to graduate school, so applied to graduate school. And I was lucky enough, I took the Foreign Service exam as an undergrad and was able to go to graduate school knowing that I had a job waiting for me. But there was a single-minded 15-year-old who decided This was the only thing she wanted to do, and she was going to do whatever it took to get in.
I love it. I love it. So I have to ask this identity question. You and I have discussed it a bit. I wonder if you might share for us how you see yourself and how you think others see you within the foreign affairs world. And if you could tell us what ways, I'm stressing the plural, you identify and how you think that has shaped your approach to your work.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I came into the Foreign Service having grown up in Southern California, went to a public university. I had the advantage that when I decided on the Foreign Service, I didn't know that women weren't supposed to be diplomats. Somebody kind of forgot to tell me that part of it because I didn't know anybody who knew anything about the Foreign Service. And the very nice people I met in Hong Kong didn't tell me that either. So I went into the Foreign Service just to be a Foreign Service officer. It really wasn't until I got to Washington that I found out that being a Southern Californian, being a public university graduate, oh, and by the way, being a woman, were issues. And my third day in the Foreign Service, so this is all I've wanted to do since, before I was old enough to go to a prom. The third day in the Foreign Service, the director of A100, which is the orientation course, calls me into the office and said, by the way, I understand how this happened, but a mistake has been made, and a woman cannot be a political officer. And so you're going to have to change your career. And what do I know? I'm, 3 days into the Foreign Service. But I'm watching, everything just spinning down the drain. I was very lucky as I walked out of his office. The senior advisor to my class, I think literally physically caught me as I came out. I told him what happened, and he said, nonsense, and kind of took me under his wing at that point. But at that point, I realized that there was something very different about me, and it wasn't necessarily going to be welcome or understood. And I'm not sure what the combination was. There weren't a lot of people from west of the Mississippi in the Foreign Service in those days either. So I was kind of this triple threat, or a triple problem. I think the worst, however, and both the worst and the best, was my second tour. I was assigned as political military officer in Bangkok, and this was during Vietnam. So we had 7 air bases, 2 Army bases, Navy base, Marine base. We had a lot of military, so there was a lot of pull mill work. And I show up as the second tour officer. I don't know this at the time. I don't learn this until later. But the head of the political military section, who was the third ranking person in one of our biggest, most important embassies at the time, had gone to the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission and said, I'm not really sure about this woman FSO thing, and I'm really not sure about this woman political officer thing. I sure as hell, am not going to have a woman in my political military section, full stop, end of conversation. And the deputy chief of mission and the ambassador both said, oh, yes, you are. And that was the end of the conversation as far as they were concerned. I get there. I don't know any of this. I go in, do my little meets and greets, and I'm very nicely shown to my office in the suite. And I will say, by the way, I am the only woman officer in the entire embassy. I'm shown to my office, and as I sit down and I look around, I notice that the mini fridge and the coffee pot and the hot plate are also in this room. He had literally put me in the kitchen, and it lacked a certain subtlety. He also, and you could do this in those days, he also gave me absolutely nothing to do. Zero, absolutely zero. And I was up for tenure. So I am watching, again, the swirling water going down the drain as my career is about, this guy is truly trying to tank my career. And what I did is, I remember I went to the head of the management section and said, I've got issues in my section. This is a big embassy. We have a lot of consulates. Could you transfer me to another section of the embassy or transfer me to one of the consulates? But basically get me out of this office because he's going to kill me, my career. Have a few conversations, nothing happens. I go to the chief of staff of the ambassador, explain to him, same thing, just move me. I'm not trying to fix him, I'm not trying to get him, just move me. A little while later, I get invited to this dinner party on a small boat in the middle of the river. As I get on, the chief of staff meets me, says, why don't you join me for dinner? I go and I sit down, I look up, and I've got the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission. It's just the four of us. And I'm sitting there, second tour officer. Oh dear. Well, tell me, Miss Bodine, how are things going? So, oh, everything's fine, sir. Everything's okay. It's good. And the chief of staff says, no, tell the ambassador what's going on. Okay, so as nicely as I could, I tell him. Same thing, just moved me. Making what is already a long story a little shorter, about a couple of weeks later, the ambassador comes to me and says, can you hang on for 2 more weeks? Sure, figuring I'm going to get moved. 2 weeks later, my boss is sent back to Washington and told to retire. Oh, okay. A new boss comes in. So in that one first several months of my second tour, on one level I saw the worst of the Foreign Service, and I certainly saw the old school Foreign Service, which did not want me there at all, even before he met me. I also saw the changes in the Foreign Service, that the ambassador, the DCM, the entire embassy, and Washington, there are many reasons that he was retired, but one of them was that, no, if we have to make a choice, he leaves. And so I saw, in some ways, as I said, some of the worst of the old school and the beginnings of the new school.
Amazing. So you shared this rather searing example of your second tour. I wonder, thinking ahead to some of the higher level leadership positions you've held, whether you ever felt that your identity posed any more or different challenges in establishing or positioning your authority.
There's no question that being a woman in the Foreign Service, and probably in most professions, you're tagged the minute you walk in the room. And there are sometimes issues of establishing who you are and what your position is. If I stood next to any guy at a social function or anything, I was assumed to be his wife. Actually, my first couple of tours, I was assumed to be his daughter. Then I graduated to being assumed to be his wife. It was established. I actually had someone come into my office when I was first tour officer, and they were looking for Vice Consul Bodine, and when would he be back? And I said, well, actually, my father is in St. Louis, but if you want to talk to the Vice Consul, I'm here to help you. What can I do? And they would, oh my God. As I moved into political military work, my second tour, and then my next substantive tour was as security assistance officer for the Arabian Peninsula. I was almost always the only woman in the room, in the building, for 5 miles. And you have to get beyond that. If you are focused on that, if you're focused on that, other people will focus on that. If you focus on, this is who I am, this is my job, this is why I'm here, this is what we're doing, these are the issues, and you, in a sense, let go of it. You don't ignore it, but you let go of it, then they will have to deal with you. And when I became the coordinator for counterterrorism, needless to say, a very male-dominated office, The one thing that I did learn, and it was an interesting, being situationally aware, as our military friends will describe it, I have a tendency, as even those of you in ISD know, I sit in the middle of a conference table, so people are around, I can see better. I don't really like sitting in the mama or daddy chair. So I'm doing counterterrorism, great big long conference table, go in for a staff meeting, and I sit in my usual place in the middle of the table. And something's not going right with the staff meetings, but I don't know quite what it is. And I did finally turn to one of my deputies and just said, there's something not working. I don't know what it is. Can you help me? And he said, you're not sitting in the right place. You need to sit at the head of the table. This office is made up of military, law enforcement, intelligence, but it's a very male hierarchical culture you've walked into to do counterterrorism, and you need to sit at the head of the table. You need to establish that you are in charge. That's it? He said, well, give it a try. And I gave it a try, and it completely changed the dynamic of the meetings. And so sometimes it's a very simple thing that you can do that is either diminishing you and you don't know it, or that will kind of place you without you being aggressive or necessarily in your face. It was just be sensitive to what are the signals around you.
I wonder also, as a woman, whether you've ever felt any additional responsibility or advantages for that matter.
Both responsibility and advantages. On the responsibility, have been aware since day 3 at least that, I mean, in my entering class, to just give you a sense, there were 2 women in my A100 class. Was very much aware that every job I went into, I was often the first woman political or substantive officer anyone had ever met, regardless of how senior they were or if they were contemporaries. Moving into the political military section in Bangkok, working in the executive secretariat on the 7th floor, working on political military affairs on the Arabian Peninsula. I was in very male environments. I was the first woman officer anyone had ever met. And I was very much aware that if I screwed up, if I failed, I would be, you know, we had a woman officer and she wasn't able to do this kind of job. She couldn't handle a hard post. She couldn't handle a difficult situation. She couldn't, and it would be tagged to every other woman. So yeah, I was aware that I needed to succeed for the sake of around me, below me, coming in. And then as I became more senior, there was, that kind of follows all the way through. You know, if you're the first woman deputy chief of mission in the Arabian Peninsula, if you're the first, the first woman, almost, first woman to turn left at the corner of M Street, I felt like, you are very much aware of that, and you're very much aware that how you do will determine opportunities for other people. At the same time, I was aware that I had the advantage that things were changing very rapidly, and my timing was great. If I had come in 5 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have survived 2 years. So language was suddenly becoming available. Hardship posts were becoming available. The whole opportunities for women was changing dramatically just as I got there. So that was an advantage. And I will say, there are times when I think women, we're not only as good as, we can be extraordinary political officers, economic officers, and everything else. I'll talk as a political officer, because we can ask an awful lot of questions. We can draw people out in conversations in ways that sometimes are more comfortable for who you're talking with. And so it's not a question of using feminine wiles, whatever those might be, but people are often more comfortable talking with you, and that this can be an advantage. But was aware that yeah, I was the first of everything, and so I had to be extra good at what I did.
Makes sense. Maybe I'll ask one more question and then open up to the group here that have all come out in the middle of exams, so get your questions
Yes,
ready.
thank you all.
I wonder if you might tell us as well about any of your champions or mentors and how they influenced your career. And maybe you could also speak to how you've paid this forward in your own career, including at State and at ISD.
I would take up the rest of the tape if I went through the people who mentored and assisted along the way. My first tour, to be honest, I mean, I was 22-year-old J.O. They shouldn't have given me a diplomatic passport. I actually went to my first tour on Youth Fair back in the day when Youth Fair existed. That's really appalling. There were a lot of people who worked with me to help me grow as an officer and as a person, who gave me remarkable responsibility early on, and then were there to help me be successful. On my first tour, my supervisor in the concert section gave me 2 sections that had normally been managed by 2 mid-level officers, and he gave both of them to me, and then was there to help me learn how to manage those. When the new political military counselor came into Bangkok, his first question to me was, do you think being a woman is an impediment to being a political military officer? And remember, I had not been given anything to do. And I said, no, of course it's not a problem. And he said, no, I don't think so either. So fine, you're now my special assistant for this whole section. At every single step, I might run into a problem, but there was somebody who, first of all, understood that the service needed to change, that we needed to bring in women, we needed to give them positions of responsibility and then authority and then leadership. And so broadly, they were very supportive and very helpful. Certainly the people who hired me to work on the Arabian Peninsula were very brave. And then also were very supportive of me. And, you know, it's one thing to have sort of an affinity group support system, which is important, but it needs to be broader than that. And so I know I stand on the shoulders of, you know, countless people who wanted women to thrive and succeed, and I think wanted me to thrive and succeed as well. In terms of trying to pay it back, every single day. When I was leaving the service, which was a very hard thing to do, one of the major reasons I went to work in the academic world was to, I've got several of my students here, is to be able to work with these next generation of policy people and convey whatever, you know, wisdom, stories, admonitions, grammar corrections that I could, all my students just laughed, that I could. But also even when I was in the service, as an ambassador, as a deputy chief of mission, I always felt that my very first responsibility was not just to develop women officers and officers of color, but to develop my staff and to take care of my staff and to make sure that each of them was the best they could be and to give them as much responsibility and work and latitude and then corrective guidance as necessary. So yes, it's a long way to yes.
I certainly feel that myself, having benefited from your guidance at ISD very much. Well, maybe we should open up to the floor. I know I could ask 1,000 more questions and talk all afternoon, but let's see what questions the group has. Please, Manuela. And please, yes, wait for the mic and then please introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are and so the video can
Is it working?
pick it up.
No. Oh, it's further. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, Ambassador Bodine. I wanted to ask about how, as a foreign service officer, you might deal with different gender norms in the tours of the countries where you're serving, and if you can have any elaborate on maybe an example that might have happened in the Arabian Peninsula or at any other tour where you encountered that the people that you had to work with might have difficulty working with you because of your gender, and how you overcame that?
Right. Well, again, part of these giants whose not only shoulders I stood on, but offered a hand all the way up. In the late 70s, the Middle East Bureau, which is the one where everyone thinks that the gender norms are stacked against women, went on a concerted recruitment campaign to find every woman economic and political officer in every bureau that they could. I was in the East Asia Bureau, given my background. And they just recruited us like crazy. You know, if you will take a job, we will give you everything. And when you're still kind of a low-level, mid-level-ish officer, by the way, to give you an idea how junior I was when I came in as an FSO 8. I think they created it for me, just to give me a couple more steps to go. No one has ever heard of that before. So the Arabian Peninsula office in NEA, they start recruiting me and to do security assistance and sales for the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, all of those guys. And because and I said, but this doesn't make any sense. I have a degree in Asian studies. I've done Hong Kong and Taiwan and Bangkok. I'm not sure I've met an Arab in my life. I really don't think I have. Why on earth do you want me? And they said, well, we're doing security assistance and sales. I have a lot of people in this office who know the Gulf, but I don't have anyone who knows the difference between an M16 and an M60. And that's what you did in Bangkok, so we'd like to have you. And I said, okay, that's great. Now let me ask you the really tough question. You know, our clients in the peninsula, are they going to work with me? And they said, yes, we really do think they will, but we're not going to know until we try. And so, yes, you would be an experiment. We will give you a desk job. We will give you, we didn't really use the word mentoring, but we will be here for you. We're going to teach you, train you, do everything possible. If you want language training, everything, we're here. Because when we send you out, we want you to succeed. So we're going to give you all the tools to succeed. But it's a gamble. Sure, I'll do that. Why not? I'd love to go to Baghdad in the early days of the Iran-Iraq War. I can't think of a better place to be. Let's see, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Baghdad, and a war. Anyway, I did it as an experiment. And my idea was, I'll do this once, we'll decide whatever it is, and then I'm going to go back to Asia. And of course, if you look at my history, I ended up staying in the Middle East. I would not have stayed in the Middle East, gone from DCM Baghdad to DCM Kuwait to ambassador to Yemen with some tours in Washington in between, if A, I didn't enjoy it. If because you're living there, you better like where you are. Well, I didn't actually like Baghdad, but like your job, like what you're doing. And B, if you're not effective. Our embassies are too small. We don't carry people for optical reasons. You have to be able to produce. And so I would not have stayed for 30 years and I think done well if I didn't think that this was where I wanted to be and if the people I was dealing with wouldn't deal with me. I never really encountered any overt resistance to working with me in any of the Middle East posts that I served in, nor did all the other women who were recruited at the same time. Many of them you all know, Beth Jones and Robin Rafel and Molly Williamson, and then the list goes on. It was quite a cohort to be a part of. It works. I mean, empirically, it works. I never found it to be a problem. When I went to Yemen, and to show you how much things changed from when I was recruited to the Middle East Bureau to when I ended up as ambassador. When I was first recruited, this was the first cohort of women to get Arabic language training ever. This was the first time women were sent out to most Middle Eastern post beyond Beirut and a few other nice ones. So we were really out there on the edge. When I got to Sana'a as ambassador, first of all, the Yemenis obviously granted me agrément, and since I had been working with them since I was a junior officer, they knew I was a woman when they granted me agrément. Wasn't a secret. My deputy chief of mission was a woman. My political officer, my economic officer, my vice consul, my assistant systems manager, the deputy commander of my Marine security guards were all women. Later, my legal attaché, my Naval Criminal Investigative Service attaché, we almost had an all-chick embassy. And it worked extremely well. And what many of us who have worked in the Middle East for all these years, what we found is that, first of all, the men will work with us just fine. That's not a problem. We have far more access with women who are increasingly in government, academic, business, a lot of other places. But socially, it's still segregated. I could go to men's events, but my male officers couldn't go to women's events. And so what we've discovered in the Middle East is that women officers have twice the access of their male counterparts, because we can operate very comfortably on both sides, where our male counterparts are much more restricted. And so it works, and it works very, very well. Would I wear a skirt like this in the Middle East? Absolutely not. But I wear pantsuits 95% of the time anyway. I didn't have to dress in any particular way. I didn't need to change how I operated at all. As I said, I wouldn't wear a skirt like this in the Middle East, but most people know I hardly ever wear them around here either. So that's not the issue. It's not a problem. It's not a problem.
Right. What other questions are there? Please, Zina.
Hi, I'm Zina, MSFS second year. I was really struck by your story about the meeting table and that situation. So I was curious, at various stages of your career, how did you decide when to adjust the work culture and when to try to make a change to the work culture? How do you determine?
It's a good question. I'm not sure that that's a really hard question. I would basically try to understand whatever culture I operated in. And it might be operating in the Middle East. It might be when I was a political military officer and I was, flying around to combat bases all over Thailand. That's a different work environment. Almost every job you take is a different environment. Coming here was very different in many ways. And I think a really good diplomat, at least, maybe a really smart person, but a really good diplomat is somebody who is attuned to what is the culture. How does it operate? What are the power structures and the signals and all of this kind of stuff. For example, how you would dress if you were working at a tech company in Silicon Valley, how you would conduct yourself if you work for an ad agency in New York. Different cultures, they're everywhere. Every work culture is different. And so being attuned to it, being aware of it, and not walking in a way that is just, in their face. One thing I did have to learn how to do when I first joined the Foreign Service is I dressed like a Southern Californian. Whoa, those colors were bright. And oh, my hair was blonde. That went away pretty quickly. Kind of figuring out, there's a certain, I think, chameleon quality to people in the Foreign Service. If you go to the Africa Bureau, the color palette is much brighter. You go to the European Bureau, they're much more studied and down, buttoned down. So you can almost see the cultures that we are working on if you go into those bureaus, because we are slightly chameleon-like. And so kind of picking up some of those. When I was doing counterterrorism, I really had to get into this law enforcement, military kind of environment. But to be honest, about the only real accommodation I had to make in terms of my personal style was to go sit at the head of the table. That was a fairly minor one. In terms of like fundamentally changing myself, no, but kind of, it's a little bit like if you're getting on the freeway, you know, you don't just go charging in. You know, you kind of watch the other cars and you merge. You're kind of merging with the cultures, but you're not fundamentally changing yourself. Mm-hmm.
Please.
Chris Wagner with SFS. I wonder about the kind of support that you encountered. So you mentioned it worked, you got a lot of help, you got a lot of people who supported you all along. And to which extent this has been institutionalized so that it's still there, or that it has been expanded, or that it may continue in some way or the other?
I mean, first of all, when I came in, we didn't even have the word mentor. I'm not really quite sure when mentor and mentorship showed up. In fact, if you had somebody senior who was helping you, they were generally called a patron. It's a slightly different connotation. The support, it was not institutional and it was not structural or formal. But I do think in the Foreign Service there is this very strong sense of intergenerational development that, you know, I will work with junior officers when I'm a deputy chief of mission to help bring them along, guidance, admonition, support, the same way that I was, you know, helped along by my supervisors. You know, I was taught how to write by senior people that I work for, and you want to see something that's really torn apart, you should have seen some of my early drafts. And then I passed that on. And so it was almost more familial kind of support. It was like having aunts and uncles, maybe grandparents in some cases. The department has become a little bit more structured about that, a little bit more careful to make sure that kind of support is there. And I know the deputy chiefs of mission, for example, are supposed to meet with junior officers on a very regular basis and be engaged with them. And that's institutionalizing what was the pattern. So that's how we do a lot of it. The downside of that is that there's still a certain ad hoc to it, and people can fall through cracks. So some of it is also knowing when and how do you reach out? When and how do you let people know that you need some kind of help or some kind of support? But you have to build your own networks. You know, they're called friends. And you talk to them and you share with them, and they support you and you support them. So you're not going to be coddled, but you will be supported and helped. I have no questions at all.
I have so many.
Yes. Phil?
Phil Goldberg from ISD. Last couple of years, the whole Me Too movement has sprung up. And not wanting to add controversy to your presentation, but has that been an issue at the State Department from what you know and from your colleagues, your women colleagues? I know that Secretary Tillerson, during his short tenure, raised it as an important issue. So I'm curious how that has played out over the years.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think the Foreign Service has the kind of cultural problems that we certainly see in, say, the entertainment business, where the casting couch was, you know, legendary well before Harvey Weinstein became famous or infamous. There was certainly bias, and I would say undoubtedly what we would, even then I would have considered very inappropriate comments. Even then, right now, they would be just considered outrageous. I would suspect that every woman officer has her own set of stories on senior officers who were well outside the bounds of appropriate behavior, well outside the bounds of appropriate conversation and comments. That was part of what you dealt with. And part of it, you knew that if you went into law or medicine or anything else, it probably wasn't going to be any different. So it wasn't that you were immune or unaware or unconcerned, but it was a little bit more part of the atmosphere. I probably had some incidents where it would have been nice to be able to report it to somebody, and it didn't exist. I think one of the things that has changed very much in the service is that we are much more aware, much more concerned, and women officers and others who are sometimes the recipients of all the wrong vocabulary and all the wrong actions now do have structures, now do have institutions, do have ways to go. And a former student of mine who is at a very nice Western European post just filed a suit and won it against her supervisor for inappropriate behavior. She had a place to go. She was listened to. It was taken seriously, and actions were taken. Before, a lot of it was that you really learned how to. Who are the people that you always stayed at least more than an arm's distance away from? You did not get close to. And then a lot of stuff you had to let go. A lot of comments, a lot of vocabulary. Being told I couldn't be a political officer. Being told that we couldn't have more than one woman on the line. Being told, I was asked when I was going to Baghdad as DCM, I was told by the person who hired me that because I was single, I wouldn't get pregnant and therefore I could come as DCM. Okay, so I think we are more aware. I think as we've gotten much more to critical mass, there's more women in positions of supervision, of authority, and there's a greater awareness. I don't think the State Department was ever as bad as some others, but maybe because so many of our posts were small, it'd be harder to get away with that. But yeah, there are still stories. Right now, we have not completely changed the culture. There is still abuse.
On a related note,
Yes,
I wonder.
there's a.
Oh, okay, please.
And then you can do your related note.
Hi, Ambassador Bodine. Good afternoon. Hi, Carolyn. A quick question. When I think about diversity, I also think about intersectionality and how certain people have privileges and then also things about their identity that counteracts those privileges. And so my question for you is, how have you potentially used some of the privileges that you have with your identity to maybe help other individuals who may have not had those privileges, particularly when you look at more people of color coming into the Foreign Service and then them facing a unique set of challenges with their identity?
Well, I think one thing that I've tried to do is, as I became a more senior officer, is to be someone that people could come to and to talk to. At one of my posts, one of my officers chose to come out to me before they came out to their family and before they came out to anyone else. And the fact that this officer felt comfortable doing that and knowing that they were going to be supported. In fact, my real reaction was, yeah, okay, fine, but you're a Foreign Service officer, so I'm delighted for you, I'm happy for you, but it doesn't change who you are as an officer. Supporting this officer that I mentioned who did have a problem, just this year at a post. letting her talk through and giving her some advice on what do you do, how do you handle this, who do you talk to. And so I think, and in some cases, going in and advocating for somebody. I think one thing that senior officers need to be very aware of, and this is officers, of any description, is to be sensitive to what's going on with your more junior officers, because they are the ones who are vulnerable, and they are the ones who don't have the tools yet to know how to deal with it, either immediately or how to deal with it institutionally. And to be sensitive, to watch the dynamic in a meeting, to watch how people are treating each other. And if necessary, call in your political counselor, call in your head of your consular section and say, I don't know if you realize how you're treating your junior officer, how you're treating the vice consul, what kind of language you're using. Don't necessarily wait for somebody to come and say, hey, I've got a problem with my boss. Try to be attuned. And I think, that's one thing that senior officers can really do is be not just accessible and open, but try to be aware and catch things before they get too far. Yes, sir.
Mark Storella from ISD. Over the years, there's been the development of some level of formal programs to try to teach people and sensitize people about equal employment opportunity issues,
Right.
very broadly. I wonder if you could comment on whether you think, during the time that you were dealing with these issues and up until now, whether or not the State Department has been effective in formally teaching about this, and if there are things we can do better.
Yeah, we worked on some of this when I was the Dean of Professional Studies at FSI. And there's always a great debate about these kinds of courses, that the people who are most open and receptive and will grow the most are the ones that probably are doing okay anyway. And the ones who resist are the ones who need it the most, and that's always one of the conundrums. I do think that they are generally useful, and I think they should continue in a way that is not putting the burden for bad behavior all in one place, but trying to change the dialogue and the perception for everyone. I will be perfectly honest, it's very easy to kind of go, if it wasn't for those white guys, the rest of us would be doing just fine. And just start beating up on all white guys. And that's like saying all blacks, all women, all gays, all anything. The minute you put the in front of something, you've lost the argument. It needs to be more inclusive, and it needs to be focused more on how does this look? How does this sound? I think most people who, except when you get to the truly extreme behavior, the Harvey Weinstein level, most people who say things and sometimes even do things that are considered now inappropriate or unwelcome don't mean it, don't understand what they're doing, don't understand how it's heard. And to talk through, what does this mean? What does this sound like? What is this word? To make it more of a conversation and less of a admonition, and to keep the conversation going. But I think it's really important that people know where they can go when something does either go wrong or they think it's gone wrong. And I've had women students who have come to me and said, this happened, was that, on the wrong side of the line? And I said, to be perfectly honest, that just sounds like a really stupid statement. But it sounds stupid rather than mean or demeaning or condescending. It just sounds stupid. And don't engage on every stupid statement that is made. You'll exhaust yourself. But try to understand and sensitize people to what is different, what is beyond. I think it's worth it. I think it should be done in A100 all the way through. The leadership school should be working on it. It's worthwhile. If nothing else, at minimum, when you have somebody who does the awful, says the awful, does the awful, needs to be called on it, needs to have a EEO suit filed, they can't say, golly, I didn't know. It will be, golly, yeah, you did know. Yeah, we talked about this. Yeah, you went through the training. You don't have an excuse for what you just did. Ignorance, no. So in that sense, yes, I think it's useful. You had a follow-up? Or did we trample all over it?
I think you mainly covered my question, but I wondered if you had advice for colleagues who might support the idea of inclusive teams working in foreign policy or at state, but don't know how. I wondered what kind of encouragement or advice you might have for those allies.
Are they selecting the team? Are they part of the team? What?
I mean, you talked a bit about the sort of leadership level and
Yeah.
advice you might have to leaders, but maybe allies at a working level as well.
Yeah.
What could they do along the way?
Well, I mean, I think one thing is again this awareness. Is so much that really is so irritating is cluelessness, is not being aware, is not looking around the room, and realizing that everyone on the panel looks the same, that everyone sitting around the country team table looks the same, that all the people who are getting the control officer job, which is what junior officers get to do when big people come for visits, that we're giving always the same jobs and responsibilities to people who look the same, and to be aware of that. It's to look for maybe the quieter person who isn't jumping in. The military has a wonderful term, this spring butts. And to watch out for spring butts and to look for the quieter person. One thing that women do to ourselves all the time is that we wait to be asked. We're notorious for that. We want to be invited. We want to be seen for our merits and everything, whereas there are other people who will just kind of go, yeah, I can do that. I have no idea what the job is, but I can do that. Watch for the person who's not volunteering, who needs the experience. So it's your responsibility as a senior officer to make sure that you are bringing people in, giving them the opportunities, giving them the exposure. If you run into a situation, this did happen to another former student of mine, where the foreign government counterpart refused to deal with her because she was a woman. And so her boss went in to see this person, and he said, oh, good, now we can have our conversation. And he said, no, I'm just here to explain to you that Manuela is the officer who is responsible for that. And if you want to talk to the U.S. government about this issue, you will talk to Manuela. Thank you very much. And with that, he left. So he went in, and he didn't do it for her. He didn't bring her along. He just sort of said, guess what? She's it. And that's what you need to do. Stand up for people, but also bring people along. Bring them along as note takers. Find ways to get that mixed up. The guys in NEA who went looking for women officers in the late 70s did not do that because of a lawsuit. They didn't do that for any other reason than they looked around and they said, the world is changing, the Foreign Service is changing, this bureau needs to change. We are going to go make a change, and we are going to bring these women in and give them jobs that nobody thinks they can have, they should have, or they will be able to do. And we're going to prove them wrong. And that's what it takes. Isaac?
Oh, here's Isaac.
Hi, Ambassador Bodine. Thank you very much for your talk today.
Sure.
I was just wondering, so you narrated the institutional change you saw at the U.S. State Department.
Right.
How would you compare this to institutional changes in other foreign services or foreign ministries throughout your time in the U.S. Foreign Service, and how that would compare to the U.S.?
We are way ahead of so many others. I mean, we have a long way to go. We've come a long way. We still have a long ways to go. Our Recruitment numbers are pretty good. I think they're around the 35-ish, 40%, I think, for most A100 classes. The attrition is too high. And it is getting those jobs that get you prepared to be the DCM, that get you prepared to therefore become the ambassador, to get all those intermediate. We're losing people along the way, but we're still so much ahead of everyone else. I mean, I am quite sure, well, I know that when I was ambassador in Yemen, I was the only woman ambassador. Some of the Europeans are doing better, some of them really not so much. There are some very old school European embassies that were almost as hard to deal with as anyone else. I would say in most places we are actually much more diverse in our embassies. We look closer to America than many others. And it has helped bring some other foreign services along. When I was leaving Yemen, 3 other women were coming in as ambassadors to other embassies because there was this, oh, I guess it works. And so we talk a lot sometimes about the demonstration effect, that you have to have women or people of color or other diversity candidates so that people can see that and aspire to something. I didn't have anyone to aspire to, but I had wonderful role models. They just didn't look like me. But we think of that as within our own service. What we sometimes don't understand is that the diversity that we are able to demonstrate in our embassies and our dealings abroad also carry a message with others. Others see this and they will say, oh, we can do this. If they can have a woman ambassador in Yemen, we can have a woman ambassador in Yemen. If we can have a gay DCM, as the Australians did, then I guess other people can. So people they don't just need the modeling, they need the permission sometimes to expand their own and to say, yes, we can do this. Yemen had appointed its first woman ambassador while I was there. And so the modeling that we do and the precedent and the affirmation that we do, we're not just doing it for ourselves. But we have a long way to go. And that's why when the diversity in our senior ranks, as is currently happening, is actually regressing from where it was 3 years ago. In terms of ambassadors, DCMs, assistant secretaries, DASs, we're actually kind of going backwards. That this is unfortunate because it not only sends a very negative signal to middle and lower ranked people in the Foreign Service, it also takes away this demonstration effect in other places. So it's important that we are able to do this. Yes, ma'am? Please.
Hi, I'm Debbie Kuhn at MSFS, second year. Thanks for talking to us. So you mentioned earlier that you felt a sort of responsibility as, maybe the first woman in a lot of the positions you had, and sort of breaking people's stereotypes about whether you might not be able to do the job.
I'll cry.
I'm wondering if what concrete steps, if there were any, or what do you think is the best strategies that you use to sort of change people's perceptions of you being able to do the job and helping you move forward?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is I just did my job. I worked hard. I knew I was going to have to work harder. I knew I was allowed fewer mistakes. I knew that if I was going to cry, that you take that in the bathroom, that you don't share that. There is kind of a lesser range of emotion that you're allowed. But it was, it's work hard. I think that's true of anybody. I mean, I think if you talk to any successful officer, they will tell you this is a tough job. It takes a lot of time. It takes passion to do this job. It takes a commitment to do it. It's not 9 to 5. It's not Monday through Friday. So I would say that, all Foreign Service officers who are successful have that passion and have that commitment. Otherwise, we wouldn't put up with this goofy job. You have to work a little bit harder, and you need to be a bit more focused on what you're doing. I would say that maybe a little bit more buttoned down, although I'm not always that good at holding on to that. Reaching out to people, though, and trying to find out who your allies are. Who can you go and talk to about how do I do this? When I say you have to work harder and do this, I'm not saying you just have to figure it out all for yourself. You can't. It's not an intuitive job. Ask questions. Can I just talk to you about, you want me to, what happened in this meeting? Could you explain why you did this and why you didn't? Teach me. I need to learn. I think one thing that I have seen that some JOs do, particularly those of you from really good schools, you were superstars in high school, you were superstars undergraduate, you're a superstars graduate, and then you go off into the Foreign Service or other parts of the US government, and you're surrounded by people who were all superstars too. And all of a sudden there's this, oh, I'm not so special anymore, am I? Oh, and I'm younger and I have no experience, oops. And there is this fear of failure. You've never failed. And all of a sudden you're gonna fail. You are going to fail, you're gonna do something stupid. Hopefully nobody dies, but you're gonna do something stupid. If you have a good boss, he or she will put you in a Cuisinart, hit spin and then talk to you about lessons learned. But learn. And I think a criticism I've heard is that these kids come in and they think they know everything and they're gonna be Secretary of State and they already know all the answers. And everyone's kind of going, guess what? I was a smart kid too. The person who says, I think I'm smart and I'm really glad to be here, but I really don't know what being a political officer is all about, and I have no idea how you write an action memo, and what exactly happened in this meeting, and how do I do this, and is open to learning, as opposed to, I already know because I'm cool, because everyone's going to know you're not. So working hard and listening is the two most important things, I guess. You guys, I was looking at you two, do you agree? Or not? I'm listening. Oh. I actually had somebody say that to me in a staff meeting, and I did a loss of confidence on him and sent him out. I said, I don't need this. I actually did. I said, I can look in the mirror and get affirmation. Huh?
I'll see you later.
Yeah. No. But he meant it seriously. Yeah.
Ambassador, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you handled making mistakes throughout your career. Not just going to pretend like you didn't have any.
Oh, yeah, I did. Oh, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, just how you handled those.
Owned up to them. I mean, and I made a couple of, I said, nobody ever died from my mistakes as far as I know. So that was my one basic standard. And a lot of times it's because I didn't ask questions. I made assumptions, and I learned not to do that. And I did a couple of things. Well, I'll tell you one mistake because it's fairly benign. When I joined the Foreign Service, Vietnam was still going on, and I had been, standing outside buildings protesting the war, and then I joined the Foreign Service and was sent to Asia. And while I was in Hong Kong, there was a public peaceful protest in front of the consulate against the war. So I took a day off and I joined the protest outside my own consulate. Not a good idea. Do not try this at home. Do not try this at home. I took a day off. I didn't do it on government time. I got called in by the Consul General the next morning, to say the least. And he could have just, read me the riot act and probably shortened my career significantly. He was very wise, and he did read me the riot act. He did put me in the Cuisinart. But then he took me out and said, look, almost everyone in this consulate agrees with you, and thank you very much for taking personal leave. But this is not appropriate. And because instead of just putting it as, boy, did you screw up, he then said, look, you now have the incredible privilege of having an inside voice on policy. That before you joined the State Department, your only voice was an outside voice. Now you have an inside voice. You can try to shape policy. You can do that comment section. I'm not even sure in those days we had the dissent channel. But use your inside voice. And I learned from that, and I learned how to manage my objections to policy. How do I do this? How do I object to policy? How do I try to shape policy besides standing outside, like an angry college student? Most, I would say, in all of the mistakes I made, I would go and talk to somebody about, first of all, own it, admit to it, don't try to blame somebody else, and then learn from it, and really do learn from it. But you're going to make mistakes. Some of them are big, some of them are funny, some of them are not. I still make mistakes. But yeah, I think the most irritating, not the most, one of the most irritating things is if I do bring up an issue with somebody else, you kind of made a mistake here, you didn't, you should have, kind of thing, and I get a whole raft of why it was somebody else's fault, or why they didn't do it, or something, when I know they did. And all they really have to say is, yeah, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen again. That's all you need to say. Don't start blaming, the cosmos for what happened. Please.
Thank you. I'm Julian. And my question is a bit more general. And I remember this is actually in this very room, one of the first conversations the two of us had when I came to Georgetown, when we spoke about your experience of being involved in Middle East politics and seeing the degradation of many countries that once were beautiful places and were torn apart by war. And I mean, I don't think it's that much of a controversial statement to say by American foreign policy. So how do you, as somebody who gives enthusiasm about the Foreign Service to the next generation, deal with the fact that you yourself have lived through a time where American foreign diplomacy or American foreign policy has led to questionable outcomes, let's put it that way.
We do make mistakes. We have made mistakes. The phrase was "mistakes were made," I think is the actual quote. There's also been some wonderful successes. And so part of your job, I think working in any institution, working here in Georgetown, there are some decisions that are made in terms of the management of the school and the university I don't agree with. One is to try to understand, to be engaged, if you're engaged in the policy, to give it your best shot, to understand the situation, to be able to write persuasively, to have your facts, to have recommendations, to have alternatives, to get fully engaged in that policy debate if it's in your area. I don't get anywhere near Latin American, Western Hemispheric issues. I'm interested in them, but I don't second guess them because I truly don't know anything about that. Then to understand that you're not going to win every policy issue that you engage on. It's statistically impossible for you to win every single one. and to have the humility to know that sometimes the other person was right. And I have actually, you talk about mistakes, I do remember this one policy that I fought tooth and nail on and was really upset when I lost, and I, not at the end of the world, but this was wrong. And about 5 or 10 years later realized that actually the way the policy went was right. And it really did open up a whole peace process that had been stalled for a very, very long time. And I actually reached out to that person who's also out of the government and said, by the way, I don't know if you remember, but you were right. And I will admit it. There are times when, you push back as much as you can. The question that often comes up is, do you stay, do you quit, do you go public? And this is one of the great dilemmas. And there's no easy answer on that. During the early days of the Yugoslav war, there was a lot of push to get much more engaged in what was happening. And I was sitting in counterterrorism and I was reading the intel reports on things like Srebrenica. And we were doing virtually nothing. There were maybe 5 people who worked on the Yugoslav desk, and they were really pushing as hard. That was you? Oh, really? Okay, so you can tell me if my story that I've been using for years is accurate. That's always frightening. Was anybody around for the story I'm about to tell? Oh, this is really scary. I need to change stories real fast. I am going to change stories because I am going to check it with him and make sure. No, I'm going to tell it. You telling me if I'm wrong. We're very much trying to change the policy. It was not working very well. A number, 2 or 3 quit, were on TV, 15 minutes of fame kind of thing. And I think there was a lot of respect that they felt that this policy was something they could not tolerate. They quit, and then they spoke out publicly. Then there were others, and obviously Phil was one of them, who opted to stay and continued to try to push and shape policy and move it where they thought it should be. And we ultimately did change our policy. And is that about right? Okay, woo, that's good. And I think, a parallel story is as we were getting the run up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which I personally think was a huge mistake on several levels. And most people in NEA, the Middle East Bureau, were very concerned that we hadn't thought this through, let's put it that way. And Bill Burns and Ryan Crocker, everyone thinks Ryan Crocker actually wrote the memo. I think Bill Burns is taking credit for it now. Wrote this memo that said, if we invade and do this, this is what's going to happen. And it went all the way to the president. And we invaded and occupied anyway, and most of what they said was going to happen did. In the case of Ambassador Goldberg, Ambassador Burns, Ambassador Crocker, they laid it all out, and they pushed as hard as they could, and we did change on Yugoslavia, we didn't on Iraq, but they opted to stay. And have been able to engage on other issues. Ryan was ultimately sent to Baghdad to kind of try to clean up the mess. Bill Burns' career is, legendary at this point. And Phil, are you publicly announced now? And Phil's going to go off and be ambassador to Colombia, which is one of our most important posts in the Western Hemisphere. Which is the more courageous and difficult thing to do, to leave or to stay? And that's a very hard question. Sometimes when you have to explain, to deliver the government's position on a policy that you disagree with, you will have to do that. And, there are ways around it. Sometimes I would go in and say, I'm here on the instructions of my government, which is a flashing light to the, okay, fine, she's reading A. Day Marsh. But you always had to remember when you were representing your government that you are representing the government. They're not actually, it's nice to talk with you and you're very intelligent and they're great conversations, but they actually want to hear what your government has to say and why your government believes that and what your government is trying to accomplish. And They need to know that you will listen with equal credibility and detail to what they say going back. And so you remember that you are representing a government and something bigger than yourself. It's not a personal conversation. So that's kind of the couple of pieces of that. I'm so glad to know my story is accurate, too. Have we finally exhausted all of you?
Well, maybe to finish up, I could ask if you have any advice for students considering careers in the foreign service or in foreign policy.
Or other foreign services, other people's foreign services. I know we've got a couple of other foreign services represented.
Right.
I think I think public service, foreign service for me, is the most fantastic thing you can do. There is something extremely special about getting up every morning and knowing that your job is to try to make your part of the world, your issue, a little bit better, to try to move policy a little bit more in the right direction, to fix things a bit, knowing that I did have one former student who, I want to change the world and I'm so frustrated and unhappy, and it's kind of like you don't get to change the world. You change a piece of it, a little piece of it. I think it's the most worthwhile work you can do. And I had days where I wished I was someplace else. Being a hostage has its downsides. Hijacked airplanes generally do not land where you intended to go, which can be very inconvenient. But I never wanted to be doing something else because I always knew that what I was ultimately working on. I knew I was ultimately trying to work on making it a little bit better, and that I didn't have that anyplace else. I can try to share it now with you guys who are going to go off and do it next. But this is where you are the prime mover. And working in the government is where the decisions are made. The academic world shapes the conversation. The think tank world shapes the conversation. The journalists report on it and shape the conversation. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of players out there. And it's, the diffusion of power horizontally, vertically, in every other direction is tremendous. But the decision is made in the government on what we're going to actually do and why we're going to actually do it. And there's no other place where you have that kind of responsibility for what happens next. And I think it's great, I really encourage all of you to think about it. I loved every year, not necessarily every day. I loved my entire career, with some days accepted. The opportunity to live abroad, the opportunity to kind of see the world and understand the world globally, to really get this sense of being connected to issues and to places and to things that are happening. What more, and then someone's going to pay you to do this. It's great. I love it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing so generously of your personal and very candid reflections of an incredible career. So
thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My pleasure, my pleasure, my pleasure.